presentation on some national stereotypes and cliches and all that. When we do that, I'm going to say some things in a minute. First of all, for all the people who don't know who I am, I think everybody knows who I am, but very quickly. So I work in qualitative market research and strategy consultant for many, many years, 25 years and plus, working in Germany and worldwide. I do a lot of luxury goods, beauty, perfume, FMCG, medical, trend, lifestyle, car, petrol, all these things. Also interesting, I do give lectures in philosophy. I have my own perfume brand. I am director's board of a number of startups, just founding a new one these days at the moment, which is quite interesting. And so Catherine is coming as well, which I think is fantastic. So yeah, we just started and I'm just explaining what I'm doing, and we start with a presentation in a few seconds. So exactly. So and what else do? I am in a creative think tank for the German government, which is quite interesting work to do, because they come with very funny questions, very interesting questions, where 100 people work together to find solutions. Or yeah, that's basically what I do. So you know who's speaking to you. Yeah, so let's jump into the topic. To tell you a little bit, I think I'm going to talk for 45 minutes now and take you through the whole charts, and there will be one part at the end where I'm going to show you some examples, what that means, and then we can talk and discuss and whatever. So if you have questions, make notes. I'm very happy to answer that. So first of all, quite important, stereotypes and cliches. I think it's quite interesting because, of course, there is nothing like the German or the one German behavior. But at the same time, there are some habits and agreements, cultural agreements among the people who are living here, learned interactions that definitely form how you behave, what you do. As I just explained, when I have a Friday afternoon appointment or meeting in France, definitely you have to be 15 minutes late, something you cannot do in Germany. So each country has these stereotypes and cliches, and they're formed by cultural interactions. And personal experiences might not equal national stereotypes. So from the many things I'm going to show you today, there might be things where you would say, my experience is totally different. Germans are never like that, which is totally true, because nobody is the German. But overall, you're going to see a lot of points that are hopefully valid. So yeah, let's start with a little history lesson, because I think it's quite interesting to open up our history book about Germany. And the first chapter I want to talk about is headed with the name Insecurities, and insecurities in many aspects. So the first question is, compared to other countries, the question, nation, what nation? I think it's quite interesting if you look at the roots of different nations. The first one, we have the British nation, we have the Magna Carta of 1215. And I remember Tony Blair had a big speech some, 10, 12 years ago, where he significantly referred back to the Magna Carta as one of the founding ideas and principles and history roots of the British nation. I mean, these are 1,000 years. When we look at America, even as a relatively young nation, they have roots back to 1620 Plymouth Rock, where still presidents today talk about their forefathers, talking about the first white Europeans coming to the United States, and 1771 America's independence. France, very interesting, this idea that Charlemagne around the year 1000 was there is still definitely relevant and present. And if not that, then definitely the French Revolution in 1789 is something the French like to connect with and take their pride and national identity from. What about Germany? When we look at a map of Germany, small part of Germany in the year 1700, if you look at the left side of the map, it looks like a crazy Jackson Pollock painting with all these colors and things like that. And each different little spot stands for a different kingdom or state or governmental thing. And you see, it's really crazy. These tiny micro states are 2 kilometers, 10 kilometers, possibly 50 kilometers large, but it's super small. There was nothing like a identity that was founded around that, and these little countries and states defined Germany for a long period of time, and it means there is, when we talk to Germans today, very often people say, "Oh, I'm a Hamburgian." It's still, for many Germans, it's difficult to say I'm a German. It's easier to say I'm a Hamburgian, because this idea of I'm coming from Hamburg was more creating identity than something like German. The national bracket German was more the language or a shared culture, but not a nation. And when you look at that, I think it's quite interesting with all these super tiny countries and things like that. I have some cartoons here. And the one on the left-hand side, it's quite interesting and funny, because you have this cartridge with goods on it. And it is at this very moment in 3 different states. So they talk about how to tax the goods, because this cartridge is at the same time in 3 different states. So you have hundreds of microstates, each one with a different political system, a different tax system, a different jurisdiction, sometimes a different religion. And that was really difficult, because when you was traveling, when I go back on this map, when you were traveling for one day in one direction, you would cross whatever 10, 20 different states. And it was very difficult to be aware or to know, what am I allowed to say in public? Because what's right in the one state might be totally wrong in the other state. What is a religious idea in this state? What kind of a jurisdiction do we have here? Do we have the Napoleon law, or do we have the old German law, which is more close to the British law? Do we have the Latin law? So it was really, really difficult for people to know exactly, what can I do in public? What can I say in public? How do I behave in public? Because it really changed every 10 kilometers. And that is true for such a long time. On the right-hand side, the cartoon, somebody says, okay, we have to do something. We have to get rid of this forest of different border signs. So something must happen. And the one who did something about that is Bismarck. We're going to talk about that, about this person in some minutes. So while we have this very steady and a long-lasting idea of a nation in other countries, in Germany, we had so many little different states going in different directions, having different political systems, whatever. And something like a German idea started possibly in 1871 with the Deutsche Reich, which was something founded by Chancellor Bismarck. And even that, I'm going to talk about that in a second, was not a happy founding. It wasn't a happy start. It was very nationalistic, very toxic. And even the Germans weren't happy that it was happening. So nobody was happy with the German Reich back then. It started as a result with the domination of France. I mean, the German emperor back then was getting his crown in Paris, in Versailles, to give the French people a bad feeling. And that was the DNA for the Deutsches Reich, which is already horrible. Then, of course, we have the whole disaster of the Third Reich. Nobody is proud about that. Since 1945, we had two German states, and I'm coming from West Germany. I just can say that there wasn't a proudness or good feeling about this Western German state. It was okay to live there, but it was certainly nothing positive. And then we have 1989, the reunification, and that was for many at first a positive thing, but also a very strange feeling to say, okay, what's happening there? It is strange. It is a strange thing. And for the first time that the Germans really have something like a positive national feeling was possibly in 2006, what is called here das Sommermärchen, which can be translated as the summer fairy tale. And that was the football world championship in Germany, where for the first time, the Germans were allowed to be proud about themselves, because they were proud to be good hosts to all the nations. So it was for the first time a proudness that was not dominating or toxic or whatever, but to say, okay, we are good hosts, we are doing a wonderful coming together for all the nations of the world. So I think that's really interesting when we talk about Germany, to be aware that this whole national identity is very different in Germany. National identity for the Germans was much more founded on culture, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So for Germans, there is no collective idea of a nation, and the first German nation was founded on toxic nationalism. There is no history to be proud of for Germans. There is no big wonderful statues in Germany where we go and say, wow, this guy from 200 years ago was amazing, or something like that. So when I go through London and you see the statues of Queen Victoria or something, you still see fresh flowers, and people are really happy and proud. We don't have that. So back to the history. When we go from 1700, the Jackson Pollock painting, we go now 100 years later. Napoleon, for example, was in Germany, Napoleon troops in Germany until 1815 with a secret police. It was quite interesting. For the first time, a secret police was established in Germany through Napoleon. And what not many people know, the people who were the Germans that were under the Napoleon troops, they started to mock them. And possibly you have seen that in Germany, we have a very strange culture of carnival where people running around like troops. And that was their idea, how to mock the Napoleon troops, to make fun of them, their strict regime, the surveillance through secret police. So just to show that how much the Germans struggles. And it is interesting to see that the Germans were spied on by different governments and different, may it be the Napoleon troops, like here we have that picture from Berlin where Napoleon is in Berlin, but also, of course, in the Third Reich, we have the Geheime Staatspolizei, the Gestapo, spying on the Germans, the Staatssicherheit. So again, the Germans learned for many, many, many centuries that it is not safe to speak out what you think in public, because you always could get be arrested or have quite negative effects for your life, for yourself, if you speak out what you really think. And it's quite interesting. There is this one German folk song which is called Die Gedanken sind frei, and it's really, really, really old. It dates back to the 15th century, and the lines are saying, "The thinking is free. No one can guess it. No gunman can shoot the thinking. I'm allowed to think what I want, but only in the still of my mind." And this is quite interesting because every pupil still in Germany learns it. It is still something, such an important folk song for Germans. And it says, okay, you may think, but don't speak out about it. So it is really deeply, deeply, deeply rooted in our culture to not do that. So for Germans, it was important for centuries to separate what you say in public from what you really think. It could save your life. And we talk about the effect that has that in a second. I'm going to pile up more information about the German history. So Germans and money, quite interesting. Germans lost their savings and fortunes twice in the last century. The first one between 1917 and 1923, it is the biggest devaluation of an economy in modern times. We still talk about the Black Friday on a New York Stock Exchange, but that was just a tiny little bit of what happened at that point in Germany, which was much bigger. We had this hyperinflation, and I still remember how my grandmother talked about that they had to bring money in buckets to the bakery to get a piece of bread. It was really crazy what happened there. So this is still in the memory of German families. It's still something you would hear from your grandma or your great-grandma. And of course, after World War II, 1945, 1948, with the reparations and everything, so Germans lost their money twice in the last century. And I have all these stories from my grandma still very present when she said how important it is to have the money in her purse and never let go from that purse because it was her money, and this steady fear that she could lose everything again and again and again. And that's a very important insight. The Germans trust the cash they have in their pockets. And that has an effect. We have the lowest rate in stock market participation in Europe. The Germans just don't trust virtual money, and the highest rate of cash usage in Europe as well. So there are reasons why we do that. Also very interesting, Germans and housing. The rate of house ownership in Germany is the lowest in Europe. And that's quite interesting because usually people do say for an economy, to boost an economy, the easiest thing is house ownership, because that is growing wealth and the income of the people and is life insurance and everything all together. In Germany, not so much, because, and that's really, really interesting, based on the fear that homeless people will become communists after World War II with all the refugees, Germany and its allies started the largest rebuilding program in Europe. As the refugees and the Germans had no money to buy, it was mainly focused on buildings with rental flats. So still today, we have many more rental flats in Germany than private houses. Until today, the rental costs in Germany are the lowest in Europe if you compare it to the income. And that was quite interesting for me to learn that we see that at several points. There was a big fear, especially for Western Germany, that directly after World War II, the Allies had the fear that Western Germany was about to become a communist state because the Germans were so fed up with Nazi and whatever, so that they tried to avoid that with a number of things. Soziale Marktwirtschaft, the social economy that was founded for Germany, is one response to that. And it is quite unique. It's a shame that we don't have that really anymore in Germany. It was possibly the best from both systems. But okay, that's my personal idea about that. So there are a lot of things, a lot of insecurity. So there was no national identity before 1989, no political unity for centuries, no historic roots as a country or a nation, no religious, economical, or legal stability for centuries, and not much to be proud of. So when everything in the outside world is insecure, of course, you look for security and stability. And so the next chapter is securities. And for me, important, I would like to separate that in two chapters. And the one is securities in the private area with social interactions, and the other one is where we find securities as in the public area as a nation. And I want to start, of course, with securities in the private and social interaction area first. I have here a chart, and let's go from left to right. German versions of securities, and it's quite interesting. The first picture you see, I think Germans possibly laugh. It is called Stammtisch. And that is something very typical German we still have on the countryside. It is one table that is reserved for the honorable men of the village. And they meet there every day to have their beer together. And it is quite interesting because it's one of the places where traditionally in a village, it was allowed to speak up, to speak out, to speak about your opinions, because it was a safe space. Everything that was said at the Stammtisch usually would not leave the Stammtisch. It was basically like the smallest form of a political entity for Germans. And the word underneath it is Überschaubarkeit. And the translation is as far as you can see. The security or the planability of something as far as you can see. And the further translation would be being in control. And it's really knowing who your friends are, being open to your friends. It's very connected to localism, being reserved towards the others who are not belonging to the Stammtisch. And just to tell you how rigid that still is, my uncle is a forester, and he moved some 20 years ago to a new place in Bavaria. And he, as an important person of the village, he usually should be a part of the Stammtisch, but it took him 10 years to be invited there. So it is really local. It's really like, oh, it is us against the others. The second chapter is inwardness, and I have this forest for a number of reasons. Innerlichkeit is a very German word which is used or is coming from the Romantic times, the Romanticism, and it means inwardness, Innerlichkeit, the inner feeling. Very often I am asked, how can it be that the Germans have all these ideas around or were creative when it comes to classic music, good writers and things like that. This all happened in this time of Romanticism. And it is so interesting when you look at German fairy tales like Snowy White. Snow White has to leave the castle and has to run to find security. And where does she find it? Behind the seven mountains, behind the mountain range in the wood where she's meeting with the dwarves. So the wood, very often in German literature, in German paintings, in German culture, is the safe space. So you can hide there. You find this is a place where you do your philosophy, your thinking, all that. Another version of German security is predictability, Berechenbarkeit. It is calculatable, and this idea that you can, if everything is unstable, or not stable, has instabilities, if you start to make it very secure and safe and predictable, is one of the routes. Often people do say why all this engineering tradition came here in Germany. The last thing is control and stability. A certain tendency of Germans definitely towards authoritarianism, and this idea of if there's a localism, the other side is somebody is doing the best for me and I don't even control it. They do what they want and somehow it might be good for us. The next picture I love. It looks like a very strange, kitschy picture, the German idea of security. And we have everything in here. So because of the mountain range, it's emotionally very predictable. You know exactly the area you're talking about. And it's also in itself, it's inward because there is no exterior. It's very protected. Everything is under control. We even have a little police helicopter. Wonderful. Isn't that beautiful? And you might think, oh, Daniel, you're overdoing it. That's a bit too kitschy. But what you don't know, this is the official website of the governing party in Germany, the Christlich-Soziale Union, and it's called the Order. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that bizarre? I mean, I just want to show that market researchers have tested that and have found out this might be the best way how to explain or how to display the German soul. And this is still so valid. I was really shocked when I saw that. It doesn't feel very international. I have to be fair, the Christlich-Soziale Union is in Bavaria, is a little bit on the more conservative side, but it's still one of the parties in responsibility in Germany at the moment, in government. So another topic, and this chart especially came from a friend, American friend, and she was coming to Germany, working in Germany, and she said, you have to talk about time and being punctual on time because it is so German. And it is really something. So it is about predictability and accountability, being on time, time efficiency, stick to time plans. This is so important for Germans. And this American friend, she said, actually, for me, the big surprise was you are viewed on how you spend your time. So after a weekend, everybody has to report what they did during the weekend, and you get a very clear feeling if it's okay or not what you did. So people are really evaluating what you do. We have some funny quotes here. Work is work and Feierabend is Feierabend, a very typical German word. Feierabend means the time after work. And that really means like work is work and fun is fun and never mix it. You're not allowed to mix it. If you do that, you're not German. Very different in other cultures. And I love this, the last quote here, 15 Minuten vor der Zeit ist der Preußen Pünktlichkeit. And it means to come to a date 15 minutes ahead is a Prussian way to be on time. So that's something very many Germans still do. If I have a date, they are quite early. And I know when I'm in France, when I'm in the US or UK, this is putting pressure on people in the UK. Then they know, oh, the people are already waiting, they're already there. But for us Germans, it is quite important, or gives us a good feeling of planability. So, oops. Securities in the private area, and you already see I'm crossing over to the public area, politics, the nation, the more outside world. And when we talk about securities here, I go back in our history lesson. 1871, the big change is made. Das Deutsche Reich is established through Chancellor Bismarck. We see him on the left-hand side. And Chancellor Bismarck creates one German state out of four very different kingdoms back then. It was Prussia and Hanover and some smaller ones.
And the cartoon you see here is quite interesting because you see Mr. Bismarck holding the hands of two children, and they don't want to go with him because the Germans back then, they had no interest in the Deutsches Reich. Only Prussia wanted to have that and nobody else. So the whole birth of the Deutsche Reich was really a strange thing. Nobody was happy about that. And to do that, they had to find something like a national saga, a national history to be proud of. They invented that. And this history was created mainly as a nationalistic reflex towards the other states. Once again, as I said before, 1871, Germany, the Deutsche Reich was founded, but after the war against France, with a horrible inthronization in Versailles of the German emperor. And when we see on the right-hand side, there is Turnvater Jan, which is a very, very strange figure in German history. Basically, he was responsible, not responsible, but he started a philosophy on well-being and being healthy. He talked about that in a healthy body, there is a healthy mind, and he wanted to have very healthy people, very healthy Germans. Later on, out of that idea started the reform movement and a lot of healthy movements in Germany. But he said he wants to have all these healthy, strong Germans for the fight against France and all other countries. So it was a very national idea to have these strong Germans, but suddenly it became a story the Germans were proud to talk about. Oh, we have this Turnvater Jan, and he's interesting. Another idea about how this national saga that did not exist was created is Richard Wagner, the composer, who was very anti-Semitic, by the way, and he started to take all these all these old German ideas and created them into stories that were sort of made up, but somehow at that time, the Germans loved to relate to that. It is a time where suddenly the architectures started to do something in Germany called neo-Gothic buildings, and they looked like old castles. So there was this whole idea to take something from the medieval times and before that, and claim it to be the German history or the German national history, which is absolutely fake and was just created. But still, there was this idea. And at the same time, this one unifying German saga that was invented for the national history to be proud of was accompanied by nationalism and a strong imperialism. We had the strong colonial countries in Europe, of course, the UK and Spain and all these countries, but Germany did that as well. And it was the Chancellor Bernhard von Bülow who said, we don't want to outshine anyone, but we also demand our place in the sun. And that was, we want to have colonies as well. And that was the starting point to, when you want to have colonies, you need a strong navy. So they started to build a strong navy. The UK or the British government at that point said, if the Germans get a strong navy, we have to get a better one as well. So this idea of the Germans to be seen and to claim we are an important nation started also all the the toxic ingredients for World War I, definitely. So that's that. It was really, really interesting because, as I said before, the Germans didn't want to have a German Reich back then. And Bismarck had a very interesting trick, which is still really important for today. To sell the German Reich, security for all. and that really meant the workers back then, to get them voting for the German Reich. And he invented the idea of a health insurance, a disability pension, the retirement pension, and the survivor pension. And this system is still working today, especially when I compare it with people in the US. This makes such a difference how we see a product or how we experience our life, that we can say, okay, basically we are pretty safe. Even if the worst thing is happening to me, there are somehow insurance systems that will cover me and protect me. And sometimes for American brands, it is interesting and has an effect on market research as well. So still talking about the public, we have the German Reich, that was 1871. We have the Weimar Republic. When was it founded? I think 1918. The first tryout of a democracy in Germany in terms of a political and economical turmoil. And it was really difficult. And it was already the foundation for the Third Reich. For many Germans, the promise of stability and a national identity. The outcome, as we all know, was a disaster. So after World War II, we then have the two Germanys. I quickly go through that to have a look at the after-war Germany. It is quite interesting because at that time, Germany is heavily under the surveillance of the Allies. And the Allies had the idea that somehow we have to re-educate the Germans. And how to re-educate a whole nation, the first important thing was the invention of the Nuremberg processes, which is found, it's really interesting because something like that did not exist before that. British and American, French, Canadian allies invented something that was really unique and is still forming law system, international law system today. At the same time, many Germans who were Nazis were not somehow targeted by jurisdiction, which was a problem. But there was this idea that the Allies tried to re-educate Germans in controlling public media, school education, law, politics, administrations. It's quite interesting that, for example, the German school books had to be signed off by the Allies until 1989. So until 1989, the Allies were in control how school books in Germany looked like. Another way was, of course, re-education through surveillance. And I have here the passport of Mr. Putin, who was working for the German Staatssicherheit in Germany. And they tried to re-educate Germans as well, of course. And he lived a long time in East Germany. So there were so really different ways how to re-educate Germans. And the most important thing, in the East as well as in the West, is captured in this quote of my teacher at school: there is really nothing to be proud of as a German. And that was the feeling until 1989, the reunification, that we were taught it's not good to be proud to be a German. Very important. Something so many people ask me about and so many people made fun of is Germans and their humor. And that's something really interesting because in former times, there was something like a German wittiness. Many people write about how clever the Germans are, how funny they can write and all that. So there used to be something like that. And especially when you see in the second column, between 1900 and until the horrible Third Reich, German humor was Jewish. All the cabaret shows were written by Jewish comedians. You had them on stage, and we had wonderful comedy. But with a killing of 6 million Jews, Germany killed its humor. And the elder gentleman on the right-hand side is Heinz Erhardt, who established a sort of humor in Germany, but it was really, really, really narrow-minded, very Spiesig, as we say. It is a really, really horrible humor, because it's so narrow-minded. Even although he was a clever person and his humor overall was cleverly done, but it was never critical. It was never laughing about whatever the government or something like that. It stayed very, very narrow. And I just had one picture here of a young comedian I really like, Moritz Neumauer, just to tell you, humor is getting better in Germany, thank God. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. So much about these different things we learn in history. And now I want to bring it together and show you some effects that has on the Germans, especially when we look on the private and the public behavior, because there is something like a very typical German divide between private behavior and public behavior. And as I said before, there is a good reason for that. So that the Germans separate that very clearly. If we talk about private behavior, number one, very important, it is the Du area, the informal address we have in Germany. And if you say something to someone, Du, it is about friends and family. We have the wonderful word Gemütlichkeit, which is a snug, comfy, cozy, being with friends all together. It is the privateness at home, where it's all happening. Here, the thoughts are free. You're very invited to speak openly what you think. You can be your real self. It is freedom. It's your private sphere. It's very relaxed. And very often, people tell me, oh, I got to know some Germans, and they're so easygoing, and we had so much fun. And that's usually the point when you meet somebody on this private behavior Do area, because Germans can be quite funny then and relaxed and everything. But quite interesting, there is a certain skepticism against the outside here, the others. And when we see the public behavior of Germans, okay, I must admit, I tried to find the most horrible picture, but it is really, really funny what's happening there. So it is at work. Of course, it is the Sie area, which is a formal address in Germany. I take my... so here it's very different. The Germans still accept hierarchies, accept rules and laws. In business context, there is still a tradition to not speak out loud, to not speak against your boss, things like that. Show respect. Very important. I'm going to talk about that in a second. To fit in, to blend in, and do not show off is very German. To if you say, oh, I have the best idea, or my idea might be very important, this could be a negative thing. It is quite interesting that we have a special word for these people. Acquaintances is a word I hear very rarely in the UK, although you might know the word. But in Germany, the word Bekannte versus friends, Freunde, means two really different things. Bekannte, yes, are the people you have at work or are quite distance, usually the people you would address with Sie, and friends are the Du people. And quite interesting, you still have these situations where people work together for whatever, 10, 20 years, and they don't talk about private issues because it doesn't belong to the work area. Something really interesting, not many foreigners know what's happening. And this is an experience I made, for example, at Unilever Germany, very international teams. So when you are at work and a group of Germans meet at work at Unilever, very international company, and they are just Germans, they all address each other with Sie. And the magic happens, one foreigner enters the group, suddenly, and without thinking, all the Germans start to use the Du. Hey, Du, Pamela, Du, whoever, no problem at all. You use first name only. But as soon as the foreigner leaves a group, it automatically switches back to Sie. Sie, Frau Müller, können wir das dann so und so machen, wie wir es gerade verabredet haben? Sie, Frau Müller, can we do it as we just talked about it? And Frau Müller was Angela just 2 seconds before. And Germans even don't notice that. That's really funny and really interesting. So the Germans had this divide, as I said before, because it was so difficult to know exactly to speak out in public what's allowed and whatever. So you have the do, warm, safety, friends area where philosophy, classic music, literature, all that happens. And you have the Z area, the other side, rational, fitting in hierarchies, organizing, being good and fulfilling tasks and things like that. And for Germans, there is quite strict separation here. And for me, it is quite interesting because a lot of business work in the US and the UK magically happens in between the two areas. It is very easy to call an agency in the UK and say, oh, I'm coming from Germany. I have some ideas. I would like to show you a presentation. It takes 10 minutes. Can I meet you for a coffee? This is impossible in Germany. I'm going to show you in a second how the typical procedure is in Germany, which is horrible. But this is where the US and the UK are so much stronger. France possibly as well, as long as it's not officially in an office. But this is interesting. Thank God the millennials, the younger generations are breaking that up. We have more and more international companies, but it is still there. Now, we're coming to the last part, to the conclusions of today, and some fun elements in this whole thing here. It is a collage of insights, and it's not absolutely 200% logical or structured. It is just a collage of insights I gained here. So, first of all, Germany changed dramatically in the last 20 years and becomes more and more international. Thank God. Still, there are some things to reflect. The Germans are looking for security. That's one of these big topics. Though they love facts and everything they can trust and explanations and proofs and all that. And they hate everything that is not security. And that often means, for example, being too loud, exaggerations, too ego, too much presenting yourself. So when we look at the positive side, the facts and explanations and trust, there are really some really funny things. I found this this funny thing, what Coke would look like if anyone listened to German consumer research, and it is of course a joke, but there is a lot of truth in it that the Germans try to explain much more, say much more, what they get, what they don't get. I love this, give or take the giant risk of a red can, despite red standing for danger, which is something very typical you would hear in a German consumer group. But we have real life examples to that. Example number one, Germans want to have proof. I don't know how much research I did for Elmex as a brand, which is a toothpaste brand. And it's an international brand. And the brand managers come to Germany and they have very fancy, very funny new advertisings. And the Germans always hate it and say, I want to see the dentist who says it is true. And it's quite interesting. They need this reassurance. Everything that's too funny or too creative around that, no, the Germans need to see the dentist that is approving that. Another proof, which I think it's an example which is so funny and interesting. I did a big testing for L'Oreal, and this is hair dye, of course. And the packaging is pretty much similar in all countries of the world, of course, with different languages on it. But only in Germany, it has additional scientific graphs on the back to support a certain security. These graphs make no sense at all. It just says how long it takes until the color goes into the hair. But the Germans, as soon as they see the graphs on the back, say, oh, now yeah, that's a good product. I love it. So that was really funny. Another example for proof, and the whole topic of proof, is we have the Stiftung Warentest. Other countries have something like that as well. It's a consumer portal where they test products, how good they are. In Germany, it's governmental supported. They get quite a lot of money to do that. And in Germany, it is the holy grail for proof and security. Everybody trusts Stiftung Warentest. And we see that sales of a positive tested product can go up by up to 30%. It is really massive. As soon as somebody sees the label Testsieger, everybody loves it, and that's much more than in any other country. Stability, just as a side fact, I think it's just interesting to see when you see at the German chancellors to see, yes, they have 14 years, 16 years. Angela is already 16 years. So even there, the Germans love the stability and the long lastingness and all that. Another thing about the Germans is this whole idea of local and narrowness. And it's quite interesting. In German cities, we have the highest densities of supermarkets, drugstores, pharmacies compared to any other country. And there is a theory that we recreate in our neighborhoods the idea of a village. The Germans love to have this narrowness that I can go to my next supermarket or go to my next whatever drugstore within 2 or 3 or 5 minutes. So this local narrowness is still there. The Germans are looking for security, and they hate a number of things. Number one, the Germans love boxing up. Sticking out of the box is not necessarily positive. It's more about you better know what you get. Too much creativity, too much diversity is a problem in German companies. I had a very long interview with the HR head of Shell in Germany, and she said it is a nightmare. She tried for 20 years to make a large corporation like Shell more diverse, and she said the Germans hate it. It's nearly impossible to establish this diversity in Germany. So Germans love to box things up, and this whole idea that eccentricity, like in something the British love, or sticking out, is definitely not valued. And you can see that Germans hate it. And I don't know how many research projects I did where an American brand said, "We are the best in." And the Germans said, no, you cannot say that. Don't claim to be the best or the only one. These are 3 quotes we have here. Somewhere there might be someone who is better. So if you say we are the best washing powder in the world, technically there might be somebody better. So you are not allowed to say that. Or the other quote I love is, if somebody is saying in 2021, our product is the best, it means that all the products before were rubbish. No, but that's how the Germans read that. And the third quote, how can they prove this to me? Everybody could claim that. So the Germans can become quite nasty when someone is saying, oops, just a second, somebody is saying that they are the best. So Germans don't like that at all. So, as I said before, there is this German split between private and public behavior. And in public, Germans love formalities and orders. As I showed you the website of the German party before, the order. This is a real photo of a police station, Ordnung muss sein, sticking to the contract, to the timing, to the deal. All that is so Germany. And the last sentence is quite interesting here. Flexibilities in contracts or agreements are seen as deeply irritating. So I had that several times, that a UK client said, okay, we made this deal, but could we be flexible on this and that? And for a German, that is really a nightmare. So one funny little thing, and we are close to the end of the presentation. And I think somebody just came in now at 6, and hopefully that wasn't a mistake, as we started at 5 German time. But how to approach a German company. And if you're lucky, you just contact the person you want to talk to them and you meet them, pretty much what you do in the UK as well. But if not, something is happening in Germany, and I think every German here in this conference will exactly know what's happening. So first contact, you approach somebody and the first contact is ignored, as it goes to the wrong person who will not pass it to the right person, which is a law in Germany. So if you address whatever Martin from Hamburg, but you don't say Martin from Hamburg, but Martin Schmidt from Hamburg, it could be the wrong person, so you better do not forward it, just let it die. So you do a new contact, and now you reach the personal assistant of the person you want to talk to. Never the person directly, always a personal assistant. And what happens is the personal assistant decides for you and the person he or she is working for, we're not interested, so goodbye. Sorry. The next thing is you recontact the personal assistant of the person you want to talk to. You say, it's really important and I really want to do that. Possibly a date is made. What happens then? You will sit in a huge conference room with 10 people and you give a presentation of your work in a very awkward setting, being under a microscope, and 10 people stare at you and you have no idea why. You get awful coffee that is burning your tummy. And then the final thing is, don't call us, we call you. You don't get a feedback. If you're happy, there's a small discussion, but very often you leave the company after the whole presentation thing and you have no idea whether they hated you or loved you or whatever. That's a very typical German thing. Something else I really love is something, I did a big research for Toyota. Germans can go crazy in private, but not so much in public. And this whole campaign of Toyota was about the fun of driving a 4-wheel drive car, going speedy, going off-hill, become dirty. So they showed the fun in using children who were really dirty and were laughing like crazy. That was impossible. The Germans hated it. And they were tolerant. They said, yes, the kids may have fun, but what does it say about their parents if they are seen like that in public? And you could see the car speeding through hills and going off-road, and driving too fast and off-road should not be shown on telly. It gives a bad example. So they showed this campaign all over the world, but not in Germany, because in public, all these things are not easy to show. Germans have humor, but not when things get serious. And this is an advertising of the Deutsche Bank Rabo Direct. And they try to make everything about banking very different with their TV ad and try to bring a Dutch humor and laissez-faire to Germany. And Germans hated it. It was all singing, all dancing. And the feedback was, you cannot do that when it's all about money. You cannot be funny when it's all about money. So these were just some examples I wanted to show you how these private public behavior split insecurities, the search for securities, then finally translate in the behavior we see.